Good morning, boys and girls. Today we're going to try a different format. I've got three questions from folks on basically on the learning process. And the questions are like this. One, how many times do we need to read books in order to get noticeable results? Okay. Two is a quote from a book by Idries Shah, and that says apparently Sufis understand with their hearts what most learned scholars uh, cannot understand with their minds. Okay? And then third, when reading and understanding, how do we know our interpretation is the right one? Okay. These are three questions that I think occur to everybody in the beginning when they're first starting out. Now, Dharma books are very, very different. We have some books that are meticulously crafted for the Western mind and the English speaker. This would be the series of books by Idries Shah, for example. We have other books that are direct translations from texts that are 2,000 years old or older, and then we have texts that make reference to very Westerners who aren't familiar. I'm thinking now of the Tibetan texts, many symbols and allegories, metaphors, proverbs, etc., that are somewhat culturally specific. Just like someone who comes here, say to the English-speaking world, has to learn a lot of idioms and things that we take for granted. And then, so let's take these in turn. How many times do we need to read books in order to get noticeable results? Well, you can get a noticeable result right there because you can ask yourself, what kind of question is that? And could it have been answered? And see, much of this is not that mysterious. So this neurophysiologist, RJ, he's a student, obviously, because if he'd been studying neurophysiology for any length of time, he would have noticed that when you're trying to understand, say, the cell membrane, it's very rare that you understand it on the first reading of a good book, a good authoritative book. Say, for example, on how the ion gate, where certain ions go from one side of the membrane to another, and they swap, and there's electrochemical conduction of a signal, so on and so on. This is complex stuff at first, all right, and maybe not. I mean, it's complex. Let's put it that way. And I remember a grad student when I was studying the same material said, I read my scientific papers three times. The first time is to get an overview, an understanding of what the scope of the paper is, the method, and just get an overview. Is it worth reading? And then he said he would read for. This is what he recommended to me as a 20-year-old. Then I read it again. This time to try and understand the real questions that are being answered from the author's point of view. And then I read it again because now I want to understand it critically. I want to read it like someone who's trying to criticize their methods, criticize their conclusions, criticize their technique. And so now, that last step about criticizing the technique, in science you need to do that. You actually need to do it here, but you don't do it as a beginner, I should say. And so it's routine for students to read books several times just for understanding. So the question is, how many times do I need to read a book to get understanding? That would be the real question. And noticeable results, that's tricky because as long as you're looking for that, you're probably going to block it. If you're reading selfishly, saying, okay, well, what am I going to get out of this? Or what is my ego going to get out of this? Then you're definitely going to be frustrated, and significantly so. And so patience, and this is why paramitas, when I'm trying to help folks that are starting out, especially the paramitas for the Buddhists, I think is the most useful, because these 6 qualities were essential for learning too, and they're not just essential for life; they're essential for learning. And so, uh, patience, discipline, effort, generosity with yourself, generosity with the author, generosity with the teacher, and so on and so forth. These things are required for no matter what you're doing in life, and it's really those attributes of our character, of our personality, that are mutable, that can be changed, and you can cultivate these the same way. Just the same way you can build a bicep by lifting weights, you could do the same thing with psycho-emotional virtue. Okay? So how many times do we need to read books to get noticeable results? Depends on the book, depends on the person, depends on the time, but it's the wrong question. How many times do we need to read books to get understanding would be the question. Now, related to that is this statement from Shah, apparently learning how to learn. Quote, Sufis understand with their hearts what learned scholars cannot understand with their minds. So the question is, what does that mean? Well, again, there's a real tendency, and I know, see, I'm teaching from my mistakes, from my experience, from all the dead alleys I went down in quite a few decades of trying to make my way here. Sufis understand with their hearts what most learned scholars cannot understand with their minds. Well, the temptation, of course, is to turn this into something that glorifies the Sufis and puts down the learned scholars because they're learned scholars, and how can they're not people of the heart, they're people of the book. They're not people of compassion, they're people of intellect. Well, but these things are all false. I mean, there's a gross generalization that people like because they want reasons not to have to do the very, very hard work sometimes for some people of understanding what's going on here. So let's look at this. Let's talk about the taste of an orange. Sufis understand with their tongues what most learned scholars cannot understand with their minds. Okay, well, all right, so this applies to taste. Sufis understand with their hearts what most learned scholars cannot understand with their minds. There are many things we cannot understand with our minds. For example, love. For example, joy. For example, truth with a capital T or B with a capital B. These things are way beyond words, okay? And so scholars, bless their heart, and thank God for them, because we wouldn't have what we have here without them. And so, of course, there are things they cannot understand with their minds, because the mind is the inappropriate instrument of reception. And so is the emotional heart, by the way, and we'll get into that in more detail later. Unless you're going down a path of what is it? I think it's bhakti or something. One where you just kind of swoon with the guru. You just kind of like see the guru and you just kind of melt, and then you kind of like bliss out with all your friends, and you just kind of, And that's a lot of fun for people. And as long as they don't hurt anybody or themselves, or they don't forestall their own development, I suppose everybody should do as they wish. I mean, I don't suppose they will. Okay, now, and then we have a question. When reading and understanding, how do we know our interpretation is the right one? Yeah, good question. Okay, so depending on what you're reading, does it fit with the rest of the material? Does it fit with the aim of the book? Does it fit with your understanding at another level of abstraction? Okay, so you could say a way can be a guide but not a fixed path. What's the right interpretation of that? Well, there's not one right interpretation about it. The word "the way" has at least 10 meanings right off the bat. Okay, and so we can't say this is what the definitive meaning of Tao means, or the definitive meaning of Tao. And so we can't say what the passage means until we've understood other elements. And again, it goes back to like studying history or studying chemistry. You have to learn some foundational material first. Uh, you got to know what the word Dharma means. You got to know that there's probably 1,000 different ways of meditating. There's not just one correct way. You've got to know, that I don't know, that Socrates was judicially murdered. So there's information one must have before you can know with any kind of feeling of certainty. Not certainty. Certainty, by the way, is the enemy of truth. So we're not looking for certainty. We're looking for understanding at different levels. So a way can be a guide, but not a fixed path. Well, at one level, that's, if you're going on a journey, you want a guide to tell you, to keep going, right? It could be a matrix. It can be a structure. It can be a principle. And so a principle can be a guide, but not a fixed principle, right? Unless we're talking about the fixed principle, and so on and so forth. So when reading and understanding, how do we know our interpretation is the right one? Well, let me tell you how one group deals with this. The way the Westerners typically deal with this is question and exam at the end of the material to make sure the student has absorbed it. I don't think that's going to go very far, but just like in the West, we have a disastrous educational system because we haven't adapted the system to the needs of the student. We've expected the student to adapt to the system, and then of course, at least in California, half the kids don't make it to high school, right? So is that the purpose of the educational system, or so in other words, you have to it takes a kind of a stepping back. So you need time. That's very, very important. And I believe there's a teaching tale in there somewhere, maybe in Tales of the Dervishes, in which the patient and I'm one of the most unpleasant aspects of my life is butchering these stories, which I do constantly. But a doctor is asked by a seasoned doctor is asked, I think, by a medical student, what should I do for this patient? He's very, very ill, but I know what the treatment is, but I just don't know how to get it in him. And the story goes along that the Sufi recommends that in addition to providing him with an orange, right, a diagnosis and an orange, which probably he needed vitamin C, he recommends that there's another element in addition to the orange and to the examination. There is, and the vitamin C, there's the issue of time. All of our illnesses have psychosomatic overlays. We are psychological creatures, and so there's always going to be things that we add. So in this tradition that I'm referring to, which actually happens to be the Sufi one, the projection of the Sufi world, the very tiny projection. You got to understand, Sufism huge. It's all over the world, and these people have been doing good for a long, long time, and teaching so on and so forth. This is a tiny little projection in the West, hoping that some of the Westerners will get their head strapped on. At any rate, so Sufis understand with their hearts what most learned scholars cannot understand with their minds. So, for example, the pain of the loss of a loved one cannot be understood by the mind entirely. There are many, many things that the mind has no chance of understanding, including truth, for example, because it's at another level of I don't even say it is. We're at lower levels of abstraction. Our brains take reality, reduce it down to something we can handle, which is objects and movement and space and time. Once we eliminate those for parameters, those dimensions, then the mind has a very, very hard time. And so the Sufis call what the Sufis call the heart. In these days we'd call, and it would be stupid to do so, but let me be stupid. We'd call that the limbic midbrain. But they're not referring to the human heart either in the chest. In this passage, not necessarily, depending on what level you're going to understand it. But so they're not referring to the heart in the chest or the heart of the limbic midbrain, the heart of the tonal, right, where the emotions come from and desire and strong hope, fear, lust, love, so on and so forth, love with a small l. No, they're referring to something else. They're referring to, at another level, they're referring to a capacity that's hidden, and it will remain hidden until you cultivate enough need for it, and then it will appear. That's one way of formulating it. It's just as good as any and better than most. And so by increasing your necessity, you increase your capacity. But that requires learning new ways of learning. And so, especially for folks who haven't had the great advantage of having undergone a rigorous educational program, say in art history or in neurophysiology or in anything, you know, they have a difficulty grokking the amount of love that this work takes. And it's love that this work responds to. But people are more enamored of what they imagine love to be, or the strong emotions that they feel, or the pleasure of just like letting everything just go and swoon into with love and emotion, you know, and just kind of like, you know, it's all great, good, it's all wonderful. However, if you're working with books and you want to meet the author where he needs you to be, and the author is let's say it's a Sufi, it's likely to require some effort on your part, because it's a totally different culture, totally different approach to learning and to cultivation. And plus, we're dealing with things that are already somewhat recondite for people because their ego wants to keep it hidden, right? And we see this all the time. So that's another level of meaning. So Sufis understand with their hearts what learned scholars cannot understand with their minds. Well, you could call the mind the heart of a scholar in a way, except that it's got the ego that is blocking it. So the scholar loves his subject, I would presume, I hope. And if they're more concerned with their own particular agenda, which is oftentimes getting the next grant or proving the other guy wrong so you can, you know, move up and advance the field, those are wonderful things. And there's much heart in scholars. But the capacity that's required is not taste, not hearing, not loving and with a small L, not anything as mundane as that. It's a hidden capacity in humans that we've lost. We've covered over with our egoic concerns and grosser emotions. So you can't hear the refined if it's being drowned out by the noise of a grosser emotion: hatred, love, lust, anger. And so these things are proscribed, not because everybody's going around trying to tell you to be virtuous. They're requirements of understanding this work from this approach. Okay? I like this. I mean, so keep the questions coming and I'll do what I can to answer them. I hope it's helpful.